Wrenchers, welcome back to Wrenchology. My name is Stormy. Today I'm going to show you how to properly diagnose and replace a 2008 Nissan Xterra's upper control arm with ball joint. Whenever you change front end components like tie rod ends, ball joints, things like that, you definitely want to make sure you get in for an alignment as soon as possible. These items will mess with those alignment angles, so you just want to make sure your vehicle is going to drive straight and you're not going to ruin your tires. As for the part that I'm using to replace it with, I did get it off of Amazon and it is a Dorman product. You can get whatever brand you'd like from your local parts stores or even online as well. Amazon's pretty good for that. Got it next day, didn't even have to leave the house. So that being said, let's move on to properly diagnosing. Okay, in order to properly diagnose a faulty ball joint like this, you have to make sure you're actually loading the ball joint correctly. In this specific case, whenever you jack up to check for the ball joints, you're going to want to jack up underneath the lower control arm right here. Not this bar, this is the sway bar, the actual lower control arm that has the lower ball joint on it as well. So let's do that. Make sure wherever you're putting it, it's not gonna slip, anything like that. You're gonna wanna jack it up until the tire isn't touching the floor anymore and you're gonna be able to shake it. Okay, now I'm gonna shake the tire up and down. What you're going to be looking for is play in the ball joint itself, as well as play on the control arm bushings. Yeah, there's a lot of play in there. So, luckily this is a control arm and ball joint assembly, so let's get it jacked up safely, put jacks underneath the frame rails. You do not want to start trying to take off this ball joint while it's jacked up under the lower control arm, so make sure that's all just free hanging. Alright, now that we've taken the tire off, we can start working on the ball joint. There should be a cotter pin in there, so your new one should also be coming with a new cotter pin. Get some dikes or whatever your preferred method of taking out cotter pins is and get this one out. The upper ball joint nut is a 22, and the best way to be able to get to this for me is going to be a shallow socket as well as a wobbly on my impact. And I always double check what way my gun is going to go. Some of them will break off on their own, but I like to remove the whole thing and then just thread it on a couple of threads so that way I know it can actually come off and it won't explode everywhere or shouldn't say that. That way it won't fling out at me whenever I do break this taper. So now that we have taken the ball joint nut off and threaded it back on, let's break that taper with a hammer. When you hit it, you want to make sure you're actually hitting the knuckle portion and not the upper ball joint portion. I mean, it doesn't matter if we hurt it because we're replacing it, but that's how you break the taper. So. See, now that taper is broken, make sure you wear hearing protection because that's super loud and I should have said that in the first place. Now you can take the nut back off. And whenever you lay this somewhere, just make sure none of your wires are super tight. You don't want to hurt anything else while you're trying to repair your vehicle. Okay, and as well as you don't want to overextend your CV joint or your CV axle. So if you start swinging this out and you see that it's trying to pull out way too far, you may want to use a hanger to be able to hold it up onto something, or even take the nut out of the CV axle. But in this case, I should be fine not taking it too much farther out than that, because all I have to do is replace the actual upper control arm. So now to take those 2 upper control arm bolts out. Well, I guess to actually find the sides first. Okay, so the outside nut is a 19. Correction, both sides are a 19. Yes, 19. So when you take bolts like these out, you want to make sure you're undoing the nut side and then have a wrench on the actual bolt side, so that way it will hold it in place so you're not fighting yourself. These bolts are going to be tight, so I'm gonna need some leverage. So a small pipe, or a long pipe I should say, on the end of your ratchet should really help with leverage. And remember which way the nut came, or remember which side the nut came off, because you want to put it on exactly how you took it off. That's the key to repairs. At least, hopefully what you're shooting for. Don't lose the nut. So whenever you go to take out the rear upper control arm bolt, you're going to end up hitting the steering shaft. So to make your life easier, turn the steering wheel so that way the position of the steering shaft will allow you to be able to get the actual nut off. Just this guy right here, and he's a 14. And that way we can move this out of the way and be able to get that upper control arm out. Just make sure you don't put it in the wrong way, so don't let the steering wheel move again. And yeah. So what I'm using to get the steering shaft off is this really fancy gear wrench tool. It's a serpentine belt tool actually. And it really allows me to get leverage in small tight areas. I will post a link to get this tool because I use it for basically everything. So I'm getting the steering shaft out. There will be a little spot that you can tell that's gonna slide out once I take the bolt out, and that's how we'll put it back in. The key is just to not let the steering wheel move, don't let tires move, don't move nothing. And if you really want to, just mark it to where you know that that's how it exactly went on, but it's kind of hard to screw up, just pay attention to what you're doing. So this is the bolt for the steering shaft. You'll see that there is a special way for it to go in. It goes in long ways, so pay attention to that and don't lose it. But out with the old, in with the new. And a lot of mistake people make when they're changing out their own ball joints is they either don't take this plastic cap off or they forget to put the boot back on. And my new control arm comes with a new cotter pin. So don't lose that or the nut. And put your bolts back in. Always start them by hand whenever you put nuts on. Just word of advice. Now to finagle the rear one back in. So your new ball joint should be tight. I like to just start everything and then tighten it all up at once. So remember, the top control arm bolts are 19s. The upper control arm bolts are tight, so I'm gonna go ahead and tighten my ball joint. You wanna get it tight and make sure that your holes line up so you can put your cotter pin in. And I like to use my dikes to wrap it around. Make sure you put a cotter pin in there so that way it can't back off. It is the safest thing you can do for yourself. Even if this nut tries to back off, it's got the cotter pin in there so it can't. So now to put the steering shaft back in. Make sure this flat spot goes back in like it was. And you'll see that once that's lined up, your bolt should be able to go right back through these holes. There we go. Gonna make sure the other side is flush with the bracket. and tighten it with a 14. All right, as long as you know your steering shaft got put back in correctly and is tight, your upper control arm bolts are tight, and your ball joint nut is tight as well with the cotter pin, it is time to put the tire back on and torque it. And I always hand start all of my lug nuts every time because I don't want to deal with stripped bolts.